G'day and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and look, very special broadcast today, and that's because we've got the Queensland Premier, Annastacia Palaszczuk, or as I affectionately call her, Nanastacia Palaszczuk, because she's such a great leader of a nanny state, has announced that she's going to be very generous and give Queenslanders back some of the freedoms she's taken away. She's going to let some of us out of prison, but only those of us who earn our freedom. She's a very great leader that way. Let's have a look at what she has said. Strict bans for COVID-19 unvaxxed, designed to lift the Queensland job rate, and that's in the Australian newspaper. I'm not going to read the whole article. Let's skip down to her tweet announcing it. She says, fully vaccinated Queenslanders will be rewarded to keep our freedoms. Lucky us. From 17th of December, or when we reach the COVID 80% double-dosed milestone. So that's going to be fantastic. We had federal LNP Senator Susan McDonald savaging the generosity of our dear leader, saying that the public health orders were nonsensical and would create a nightmare for business owners and their staff. She fails to understand how unvaccinated and vaccinated are allowed to cram into a train carriage or a bus, but can't mingle in a pub. She's spoken to many business owners who are worried about trying to control entry based on vaccination status. Well, one such of those business owners is Philip DeBella, and he released a video on his LinkedIn page this morning.
Greetings, everyone. You notice that I've been very quiet around the COVID thing. And as I promised about a month ago, when the world where there's so much noise, if you can't improve on the silence, don't speak. And up until now, well, something I posed to you, there's talk about December 17, Queensland. It's going to be mandatory before you're allowed to go into a pub, club or cafe or restaurant.
Just to clarify for everyone, I should have introduced him a bit better. Phil DeBella is the founder of DeBella Coffee and a very great Queensland entrepreneur. He sold it some years ago for nearly $50 million, so not a small business at all. He's certainly well qualified to speak to the business community. But let's just keep listening what he had to say about that.
It's going to be mandatory for you to have the vaccine. What does this world come to? Is this something that we're prepared to let happen? Is it? You as an individual, your human rights. Everyone fought for human rights. Everyone talked about their rights, their human rights. We signed up to treaties around the world. Forget about the vaccine. It's not about vaccine or not vaccine. It's about mandating something that takes away freedoms of people if they don't comply, and complying to something that's been, let alone rushed through and not followed its proper processes. But yeah, it's been, now being pushed to people that there's a chance that it's going to be mandated and compulsory for you to be vaccinated, or you're not allowed into a venue. Won't be happening in my venue, I can assure you. The Coffee Commune will not discriminate. You want to be vaccinated, you be vaccinated. You don't, you don't. You take the health precautions that you need for yourself. But if this is a standard that humans in this state, in this country, in this world want to allow past, and I really question where humans have really taken their thinking and their morale when people have gone to war, lost lives, trillions of dollars spent, all on protecting someone's rights and their human rights. And now we're happy to let politicians just do this. I don't stand for it. It's not something that I believe in. And again, this is not a post about vaccines or not vaccines. This is about human rights. This is about dictatorship. This is about being dictated to or not being dictated to. And I'll leave you with this. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And is this something that you're prepared to accept? Because God knows what's coming if you are. Remember this, politicians work for the people. And if you support them mandating something like this, that you have your human rights taken away on where you can eat, where you can drink, where you can associate, where you can go based on whether you are vaccinated or not, then you've got rocks in your head and this country has gone mad. And as I've said, you don't know whether I'm vaccinated or not vaccinated because it doesn't matter. It is still a human rights discussion. Think about it, because the standard you walk past is the standard you accept.
Come on, Phil. That's awesome. Well, he went on, and then the Courier Mail decided to write a headline: Coffee King Philip DeBella to defy mandate banning unvaccinated people from Queensland venues. No, not true. That's not actually true at all. I spoke to Phil a little while ago, and here's a statement that he sent the good source, Pellowe Talk, which I believe the Courier Mail and maybe some of the television shows, television news will be covering tonight. But his position is that everyone should be vaccinated when they believe the time is right for them. That might have been 12 months ago, right now, or it may be in 12 months' time, a long time from now when people feel they know more. However, he personally believes people should not be ostracized for it and certainly not discriminated against. The Coffee Commune, that's his new business, coffee business for baristas and connoisseurs of coffee in the inner city, will abide by any past legislation, not defy. But that doesn't mean we will be resourced to police it. And as always, the Coffee Commune will be an authority for its members to ensure they know and understand what the legislation means for them. We pride ourselves on providing a safe, accepting place of work, and nothing will change about that, said Phil DeBella. Many businesses have struggled through this entire pandemic, and most are now left with the sole choice to accept this government regulation just to make a living. It's Phil's personal opinion that this is simply another huge blow for these businesses and an unprecedented overreach by the government. Business owners should have the right to accept who can enter their businesses because they are the ones who carry the financial and personal risks of operating their businesses. Again, business owners shouldn't be discriminated against for their choice. This is not about vaccines at all. This is an issue of businesses being dictated to and not knowing where it will end. Allow people to make their own choices. And he repeats, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That is 100% true. And I super appreciate Phil DeBella for making that stand. And it's an important stand. There should be no business in Australia, in Queensland, or in any freedom-loving nation which discriminates against people for the medical decisions that they've made. And we see this politic completely dividing Australia right now. I have seen members of families attacking each other publicly and calling them fools for personal medical decisions they've made. Possibly taking it, possibly abstaining from it. Whose business is it? This is utter destruction of society by government. Well, somebody who knows what it's like, the weight on the shoulders to run a state and to know where the power should stop and the responsibility for safety of others begin and end is former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman, and he joins me right now. Campbell, thank you so much for joining me on Pellowe Talk today. We'll just make sure we add you to the technology there. Gotcha.
Great to be with you again, Dave. Thanks for having me.
So I guess we need to identify, first of all, you're a former LNP Queensland Premier, which everybody should know. And I think the margin of support you enjoyed at the Queensland election where you lost your seat and government is actually more popularity than either opposition leader or Annastacia Palaszczuk enjoys right now. But you're also now running for the federal Senate as a candidate for the Liberal Democrats. Congratulations. And I'm personally really happy to see the chance of a strong federal crossbench. Let's just start with a broad overview. What are the political philosophies of the Liberal Democrats and how are they different from the LNP or the federal coalition?
Well, Dave, the Liberal Democrats are not a right-wing party. That's just lazy journalism when people say that. Basically, it's probably a bit of an old label. Here's where we stand. If you're talking about the role of government, we believe in small government. We believe in fiscal responsibility, balanced budgets, keeping debt low, under control, and low and fair taxes. We believe in personal responsibility. We believe in people having the ability to create a business, employ people, grow that business, be rewarded by the profits from that business, having taken risks, and also being able to build personal wealth for them and their families. So we do believe in free enterprise and the right of the individual to grow themselves and their business. When it comes to social issues, though, very much we come from the point of view that my business is my business. So whether I choose to get vaccinated or not is my choice. And it's not for me to impose my values on other people, as long as those other people in living their lives are not affecting me. So, for example, on those social issues, we are libertarian. We believe in the individual's right to live their life as they please. So, back 10 years ago, when I was the leader of the opposition in Queensland, I backed gay marriage. Well before many people in the Labor Party, like Penny Wong, would even dare to do that publicly.
Yep.
It sounds silly. It was only 10 years ago. I believe in drug law reform, and I've supported voluntary assisted dying in this state. So, that's where we're coming from. So it's an interesting mix. It's not right wing. It's not hard right. It's not conservative. It's actually, in many ways, quite progressive when it comes to those social issues. But again, it comes down to it's government doesn't have the solutions, Dave. It's about individuals in society that ultimately improve a lot of us all working together.
Yeah. You and I definitely don't agree on some of those social issues and government's role in them. But right now, I think the pressing issue in Australia is an extraordinary grab for power, and a libertarian attitude is exactly what's needed. I wish there was a liberal attitude somewhere in the government, in the nation, just allowing liberty and individual freedoms. And I think we can get carried away with that, but we've certainly got carried away with authoritarianism. And,
over the last 2 years, yeah, absolutely, and it's happening everywhere. The only state where we've seen at times some quite promising pushback from government has been New South Wales, but it doesn't matter whether it's the Liberal Premier of South Australia, the WA Labor Premier, the Queensland Labor Premier, the Victorian Labor Premier, or our Prime Minister, who's supposedly a Liberal Party guy. It doesn't matter. They're all just either implementing this stuff, or in the case of Morrison, waving it through, not taking a stand. And that's one of my personal beefs with the PM, in that when some of the terrible things have happened in the last 2 years, like police firing on protesters in Victoria, he says nothing. And I don't believe, I could be wrong, I don't believe he said anything in the last 24 hours. You quoted Susan McDonald before, but he hasn't said anything about what Palaszczuk is about to try and implement, which is just not on.
Yep. And it is an abdication of leadership, or a failure of leadership, for Morrison to not be leading the commentary and opinion on this. It's such false virtue to think the federal government is in any way wanting to stay out of state businesses. Obviously, the states should be sovereign, but so much of that distribution of power and decentralization of government was ceded a very long time ago through successive federal governments and high court decisions. And so for Scott Morrison to think he's nobly minding his own business right now is to leave us alone, when he absolutely should be sticking his nose in and saying, let's defend Clive Palmer's and now Flight Centre's challenges against the Western Australian border closures, because those are violations of the right to free intercourse between the states, as set out in the Constitution. Where is he? He's missing an action. You made a good point, which I actually mentioned earlier today on the radio with Vision Christian Radio with Neil Johnson, and that is liberty isn't a left or right issue. This isn't something that leftists are getting carried away with. This is something that so many liberal, as in right-wing liberal and conservatives and Christians, are really getting wrong. And this grab for this lurch towards authoritarianism, it's no longer a left or right issue. We have to get this right before we can move forward as a nation.
Look, what's happened in the last 2 years has really exposed a whole crop of politicians that we now have, who seem to think that they're just numbers. They're almost as foot soldiers to do as they're told, and just vote in Parliament and support this stuff. It's not on. I expected far more from people in the Liberal National Party. One of the reasons I left was my absolute dismay at the way they weren't dealing with it. So I'm going to name some. People like Trevor Evans, the federal member for Brisbane, silent, while businesses in his area are being hit hard. Julian Simmons, the member for Ryan, who's silent. Look, the reason I'm naming them is they're in government. Senator James McGrath, who loves to bleat on about the ABC and the way they carry on, but he's been in government for 8 years and never actually done anything about the ABC. Look, I'm over these politicians who won't actually stand up and defend free speech and freedom. Both are they're actually quite different. They're obviously joined. If you don't have free speech, you quickly don't have freedom. So for Senator McGrath, he should have got an outcome by now after 8 years in office in terms of getting the ABC to allow free speech and proper debate about the nation's issues as a national broadcaster. Similarly, those two federal MPs in the Brisbane metro area, where have they been in standing up against this stuff? I mean, I can understand. I don't appreciate it. Labor members of Parliament, state and federal, being silent about what the Premier is about to do, but I can't abide the idea of those two MPs just running dead on the whole issue. They should be organising protests. They should be organising the petitions. They should be organising a campaign of civil disobedience. They've got the position. What are they doing with it? They're just sort of sitting there in their offices, not actually working hard enough.
Yeah. I've got a question here. I'll try and remember what I was just going to ask, but I want to ask Annette's question. Annette Page asks, what can we do to stop this power grab by Annastacia? Never thought I would see the day when some people are going to be denied basic human rights. Well said, Annette. Your thoughts, Campbell?
Well, look, I've got a few ideas about that. I suppose my first point is I'm loath to recommend to people they break the law because, we ultimately have to respect the law. So I think a whole heap of Annastacia Palaszczuk's rules and regulations are just ridiculous, facile, stupid, inconsistent, illogical. But I've tried as much as I can to obey those laws. But I think this is getting a bit ridiculous now, and we do need to talk about why it is ridiculous. But I'd put one idea on the table for struggling small businesses that have put up with so much for so long from Palaszczuk and her government, and it's this. And I know many people won't do this, but I'd put this challenge on the table. Premier Palaszczuk wants you to control who can go into your business on the basis of their personal medical record. Well, it's not on, obviously. Well, what can you do about it? Well, I'd say this. You should come together and say that we won't have Annastacia Palaszczuk or any of her ministers or any of the MPs, Labor, LNP, Katter Party. I wouldn't. Anybody, look, any politician, any political party in the state parliament who hasn't spoken up and have vigorously opposed these draconian and stupid laws. There you go. So, number one target, of course, is the Premier. Don't have her into your coffee shop. Don't serve her at your restaurant. Tell her to get out of your pub. That's my challenge. I don't know if anyone will do it, but they should. And that's the way to get enough. That's the way to actually get the media to sit up and take notice. If she's trying to destroy your business, because taking maybe 20% of your customers away, if we understand the figures about those who are unvaccinated at the moment, taking away them as potential customers, she's really it's a dagger blow at your livelihood. So why not? That'll make the point. Maybe she might get it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that would make a media spectacle, and even if the lying harlot media wouldn't cover it, every independent outlet, blogger and journalist certainly would give it a very wide run. Now, Ross Matchett asked a question a few hours ago, so I can't put it on the screen, but he says, only one question to Mr. Newman. What would you do differently if you were still Premier? You understand the obligations?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Look, I guess we probably need to get into the detail of rebutting what the Premier is doing, but probably and a good way to do that is to talk about what the Liberal Democrats' policy is on this whole thing. It's fairly straightforward. I actually believe in vaccination. I don't have to, but I'll share with you and your viewers that I am vaccinated. Let's get that out of the way. But our position is that anybody who wants to be vaccinated should have the opportunity to get access to a vaccine across the length and breadth of Queensland. But come the 4th of December, which we nominated some time ago now, we open up. And we open up and we get rid of the QR codes. We don't have any sort of restrictions about going interstate or whatever, or overseas for that matter. We don't seek to ask people about their status. Those who've been vaccinated, as far as the science says, will have the best protection. Those who choose not to will be relying on their natural immune systems in their bodies. And that's personal responsibility. If they get ill, and they might, well, we've got a great health system, and it'll have to be ready to take people if they get ill. But that's pretty straightforward. It's about personal responsibility and personal decisions. And if we start to talk about the lunacy of what the Premier's asking, it's like, as I've just said, I'm vaccinated. I'm very happy to go to a pub and have someone who's unvaccinated come in and sit next to me at the pub. What do I care about it? I've got the best possible protection. So why should that person be excluded? It's a farce. Another sort of subset of this as being a farce is today I've been to a lunch with a couple of friends, and we sat in a restaurant, and other people were there as well. And as of the rules today, vaccinated and unvaccinated can be there. But magically, in only a few days' time on the 17th of November or thereafter, those people who were in that restaurant wouldn't be permitted anymore. And yet overall the vaccine sort of numbers are up across the state. Every day we see more people vaccinated. So what's this all about? I mean, how ludicrous is that? How arbitrary is that? Well, what it's about is this. They want to get the numbers higher because it's a political problem for them if people get sick. It's a political problem, obviously, if people die. And this government has done such a bad job in the last 8 or 9 months that they haven't got the numbers up to where they need to be, particularly in vulnerable, some of the Aboriginal communities and the like. And so they're just really scrambling to try and force people to get the shot. That's what this is about. It is about coercion. It's about trying to put pressure on you and you and you and you. Go and get the shot, otherwise you'll be excluded from society. And it's wrong. So I hope that makes it crystal clear. This has to be fought. It has to be resisted. It's just not on. And you know what? Prior to this pandemic, the idea that you would hand over your personal medical information to the person who's running a bar or a restaurant or a coffee shop or some venue, that you would actually say, here's my international health certificate with my shots, or I haven't got AIDS, or, I mean, come on. I mean, that's how outrageous it is. For those who might be watching who's still unconvinced, I really implore you to really think this through. Think about what it means when we have this sort of coercion being mandated by government. This is not, as DeBella said, this is not about whether vaccines are good or bad, or there's risks, or it's not an anti-vaxxer thing. It is about free thought, freedom of action, freedom of, to live your life. That's what it's about. Again, if I'm vaccinated, I don't care two hoots, David, if you're vaccinated or not. I've got the best protection I can get, and I just want to get on with my life. I don't care at all.
Now, what about early prevention, early treatment, so prevention and early treatment if diagnosed? What's your thoughts on the railroading, which is the language I'll put around it, the railroading of the TGA and what TGA is responsible for it, banning all other treatments, which a fully trained, 8 years trained, fully qualified, licensed and accredited doctor can agree to supervise with a patient. Why should the government be able to remove those early treatment and prevention pharmaceuticals?
Well, I'm deeply suspicious of the TGA and some of the other bodies involved in this whole thing. And this might not make sense, but it's just another example of the way they conduct themselves. like many people in the community, I sometimes get migraines, and the only pain relief that is effective for me is a product that I can't buy anymore over the counter. It's called Panadine, and thanks to their stupid nanny state decision a few years ago, backed up by Greg Hunt, the federal health minister, you now have to go to a GP and get a prescription because they claim that it promoted, people that were codeine dependent. Now, I was in my mid-50s when those bans came in. I've never abused codeine. Why should I be excluded from getting this medicine cheaply and effectively, instead of being put through a process to go and get a prescription, being given the third degree by the doctor, but also when you go and buy it at the pharmacist, it's like you're sort of doing something creepy. But meantime, I'm sure that if I really wanted to go looking, I could buy illicit drugs in this city any number of ways. So this is the stupidity of these organisations who think they know best, who think they know better than Australians, who are trying to dictate to people's physicians about how they can go about treating people with drugs that have been approved and are safe and have been around for quite a long time. I mean, the big debate about, say, hydrochloroquine, whatever it's called. I mean, I took that when I was in the army. I was prescribed for malaria.
But don't you know it's a horse worming tablet? It's only for horses.
It's just hoo-ha. So I'm being as polite as I can about the TGA. I don't know. There's probably a word I might use over a few beers that's a bit stronger about how I feel about them and Greg Hunt for allowing them to conduct themselves in the way they have, and indeed just going back to that Panadine ban. It's just this country's got this topsy-turvy wacko view where terribly bad things have on over here that cause real damage to society.
Yep.
But then we set up rules which inflict an outcome on everybody just because a minority were doing the wrong thing or had a problem which they needed help for. So it's crazy stuff.
I've got a couple of thoughts. I want to go back to one of the earlier questions though, and that is, what you would do differently if you were Premier. Now, I would like talking to you because you can actually put yourself in the hot seat, the pressures it takes. And I understand, politics is a game of possibility. I've heard you don't always get to do what you want, and you maybe, were, a little bit aggressive with what you wanted and less concerned about the possibilities. And kudos to you for that. I think you did, wonderful jobs in reducing bloated public services, which was really badly marketed. But the thing we see Gladys Berejiklian doing and the Liberal people, or the people in the Liberal Party in South Australia in these state parties is actually listening to and quoting on and relying the invocation of the magic word science. Would you be prepared to go against the science? Because Annastacia Palaszczuk is now saying that health advice has recommended these draconian removals of freedom and punishments of people. She's saying that's the health advice for Queensland to go forward. If you got that kind of health advice, how would you navigate the politics of the conflict there with your convictions?
Well, pretty straightforward, and I do say it having been there. The health advice, if indeed that's it, and I don't really necessarily believe the Premier, it is rolled gold baloney. Let's see it for a start. Okay? I mean, just going back, just putting aside just this specific issue here and now, I mean, where have we been in the last 2 years? I mean, sometimes you can have 50 people at a wedding, or it might have been 20 or at 30. But if it was a full moon and the wind was from the southwest and there was a high tide at Shorncliffe on the same moment, then maybe you could have 65 people. Why not 62? Or what about 90? Like this is why this is baloney. It's just completely arbitrary. No, I can say to you quite firmly and categorically, I would reject advice like this, and I would be implementing exactly what I've told you this afternoon if I was in the seat right now. We have to open up. And maybe for some people who are doubting what I'm saying and it might be helpful for some context. I was with a business colleague yesterday, and I was talking to her, and I said, how many people do you think have died in Australia in the age bracket from basically a baby, 0, to the age of 49? How many people do you think have died from COVID since this whole thing started? And she said, about 1,000. And I said, okay, right, let's park that. I said, how many do you think have died in the age group? We're both roughly the same age bracket. And I asked her, how many do you think have died in the age group 50 to 59? And she said, about 700. I said, well, in the first answer, where you said 1,000, so it's the age group 0 to 49, I'm told it's 61. 61 people. So in the next age group, the one I'm in, where she thought it was 700, 50 to 59, it's 85. This is a disease that sadly kills the older people, the people in their 80s, late 70s, 80s, 90s, and those who have underlying health issues. Those are the facts. So, an alternative scenario might have been to have very stringent controls to protect the elderly in the community because they needed it until such time as they were able to be vaccinated, which, of course, was meant to be the plan, that part of it. But this whole thing has been without proportion, without perspective, and that's the difference between the way I'd handle it and versus the way that most other state leaders have handled it. I mean, we saw Berejiklian showing that sort of approach that I've just mentioned, and also reassuringly, Perrottet he started off that way. He might be wavering a bit now, but we've got to get on with life. The collateral damage, the unintended consequences are just mounting up, and they can't be swept under the carpet any longer. Yeah,
it's absolutely true. One of the thoughts I've had about this whole experiment in government that Australia and the world has undertaken recently, but speaking about our backyard, Australia, is the disposability of things we once called, or our politicians and parties once called, values and principles.
Yeah.
And I just, at the same time, I don't know how so many voters didn't see this coming at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was utterly opposed to all lockdown measures, all of them, because they just violate fundamental human rights. And if there was a scope and possibility, then perhaps it was a very short-lived window only to get some emergency measures which weren't violations of human rights into place. But what we see really is an extension of a principle that most Australians said nothing about back when Scott Morrison said no vaccination for your kids, then you wouldn't be allowed into childcare or you wouldn't get family tax benefits. I think whatever the slogan was, they came up with it back when he was health minister. I mean, this is just the same thing then. There was coercive tactics to force parents to make medical decisions that they didn't want to make against their privacy and against their medical autonomy. And we now see exactly the same principles playing out, that it's okay for the government to coerce you into medical procedures that you don't want, specifically vaccinations, with devastating impacts on people's income and livelihoods, most affecting the economically vulnerable. What are your thoughts? I mean, first, on those old, before COVID, were you a supporter of the no vaccine, no childcare benefit?
Look, I need to be truthful about this, and probably back then I would have been a supporter of such measures. Not that I played a particular role in it or was involved in any sort of political debate or argument, but probably if someone had asked me, I'd have said, probably. But I just want to qualify that a bit as well. So I'm trying to be upfront about that. But
yeah, please.
This is a
get smarter.
This is a similar issue. When I was Premier, I inherited a situation where former Premier Anna Bligh had mandated that fluoride had to be put in the water around Queensland. Now, I'm a big supporter of fluoride in the water. I think that's good. But I also believe in devolution of authority and responsibility. And so we sort of overturned that and said local governments get to make that decision. So every community has to decide whether they want to actually fluoridate the water. You think about it is the same thing as this vaccination issue. It's mass medication, compulsory medication, no choice. It's in your drinking water. Someone's putting something into it. This is about putting a shot in your arm and saying you have to take that too. So similar thing. So I just put that on the table so that people know that that is a stance I took then. I probably was swayed on the vaccine thing in terms of childcare because of some of the early childhood diseases, which are so infectious, but also because, in my view, and all the information I had, those vaccines were tried and tested, had a long track record. They also have a bit of a difference between this and the COVID vaccine. It's an important difference, David, and that those shots, you have the shot, A, you get immunity, but B, you, as I would understand it, you're then not a carrier, okay? Well, we now know that with a COVID shot, you can be vaccinated and you can still carry it, okay? So it's a different thing. So, there's a similar argument to mandate COVID vaccines if the person who had the shot immediately could not carry. That's not the case. Therefore, it's a bit of a moot point and the argument drops away quite dramatically. So I guess just rounding this all up, yes, I have to make that admission about back then about childcare. But you know what? If it was presented with me today, I'd probably be erring more towards what I've just told you about my position on fluoride, because I guess back then I didn't know where this was going to go. And if you now look at it now, you could view it as the thin end of the wedge. I hope if that makes sense.
Yeah, and look, this is my point, because I argued back then that the vaccination was being coerced and was not voluntary, and people argued with me and pushed back and said, no, it's completely optional, it's completely voluntary. Getting family tax benefit is a privilege. It's not a right. And I'm like, well, hang on, we're saying this is a necessary government service for people with lower incomes across Australia. And so what we're now going to do is discriminate and create two classes of people, and those people that we've deemed as needing it anyway somehow don't deserve it. We're going to treat them as lesser. Essentially, we are going to financially punish them, and that is coercive. That is
look, you're right. It was, and I think it must have paved the way in the minds of the public health professionals about what they maybe thought they could get away with now. And that's, by the way, that's why it's just so important now to say enough's enough.
Right, and right from the beginning. I had friends who I respect, even superiors, Christian mentors, conservative, and just share all of my values, and then they're embracing this authoritarianism. I'm like, hey, you might feel comfortable trusting this government, but we are creating precedents and exceptions to principles, which is a contradiction of terms. And we don't know what the government 10 years from now is going to be like in character and integrity. We are setting ourselves up, and either our principles and our values are principles and values, or they're just situational.
Oh, well, look, can I then segue to another example of what's going wrong in this country? And it's under cover of COVID, and that is the way that we're now seeing quite insidious legislation that allows law enforcement to actually go into people's social media and change materials, and do that not with an authority of a judge, but simply someone from the AAT, which is a very low bar, and it will be misused. Another thing that's going on is the government's implementing a digital ID system. Now,
Right.
when I was a young chap, I went on the first protest march I ever went on in my life was in 1987 here in Brisbane. It was against the national identity scheme that the Hawke government wanted to bring in, called the Australia Card.
Mm-hmm.
And I marched on that, on the Brisbane streets against that. And it was because a guy called John Howard, who was the leader of the opposition, leader of the Liberal Party, was against it, opposing it. We go forward 34 years, we've got a so-called Liberal Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and a Liberal coalition government, the National Party, who are going to introduce a digital ID system. And I say, why? And what will it be required for? Show us your, pulled over. If you're pulled over by the police or whatever, will you have to show it? I mean, will you have to carry a phone at all times? I mean, this stuff is being pushed through, rammed through under cover of COVID. And by the way, for those of us in small business or larger business, I mean, coalition governments just introduced laws that you have to have a director ID number.
Yes.
Why?
One of those.
Well, I'll tell you the reason. They're saying this is to crack down on people who do this practice called phoenixing, where they basically run a company into the red, incur debts, put it into liquidation, then go and do the whole thing again. Well, why do I have to be ID'd, David? I'm a law-abiding citizen. I've been in business in aggregate for about 20 years. Never done the wrong thing. Why do I have to be ID'd? Because there are crims out there who the authorities probably know who they are, who they should be going after them. That's where the resource should go. I mean, what are they going to do next? We're going to have to be microchipped like dogs behind the right ear to be a director of a company. Look, this stuff is just not on. And that's why I left the Liberal National Party. Yeah. That's why I was so scathing about people like Simmons earlier on and McGrath. They're just waving this stuff through. And yet you talked about values, you talked about principles. The Liberal Party is not meant to be about that stuff. I'd love to debate these guys. Hopefully during the election campaign they'll have the guts to, but they better watch out, because I'll be taking to them on these issues. It's just not good enough. I don't know how they even dare to call themselves a centre-right party.
Exactly right. I think the Liberal Party I appreciate, as in gauge the importance of, not necessarily like, but I appreciate the concept of the broad tent and being inclusive of people and ideas right of centre. I think that should not be stretched and abused to the point that we're including people left of centre, and there are very many of them that are, pulling levers of power and influence in the Liberal Party. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting thing. I've got a couple of questions still. One of them is, I have this theory that cabinet positions, ministries and assistant ministries actually possibly appropriately require some party discipline and not stepping out of line, not criticising the government. I think there is therefore a conflict of interest for people in the Senate, even party members in the Senate, to have cabinet positions, ministries, shadow ministries, or assistants, career possibilities. I guess I'm after your thoughts on that. Do you think senators should refuse career promotion? Should the Senate be the ultimate that they can reach in that? Well, part B of the question is, if you were offered a really juicy portfolio as a crossbench senator, would you feel that would compromise your ability to perform the role of the Senate, checks and balances, a house of review?
Well, if I am elected as a senator for Queensland for the Liberal Democrats, and I'm in that crossbench, absolutely the scenario you've painted would compromise me because of that cabinet solidarity issue. So I couldn't possibly be part of that. And, I want to hold government to account. I mean, I want to, if I'm there, ensure that these sorts of freedom-limiting pieces of legislation are debated properly and curtailed or downright stopped. I want to ensure that we try and see better expenditure of the taxpayers' funds and not just wade through the profligate expenditure we're seeing now. But one particular one I think that's important is when they have the Senate Estimates Committee process and the senators question both the politicians, the ministers, and also senior public servants, that putting the blowtorch on those individuals to make sure they're performing. Because frankly, I have a view they're not performing. I think they waste our money. I think the breathtaking incompetence that we see in so many ways, for example, robo-debt, Stuart Robert down on the Gold Coast should have walked the plank over that one as a minister. But he was protected by the Prime Minister, and many people of limited means were terribly scarred by that experience of being accused of having done the wrong thing and have been told that they had debts that they had to pay. So, it's stuff like that. That's why I want to be there, and that's to do that job. It would be incompatible with those objectives to be in a ministry.
We have one question here from Nick. He says, hey, Palaszczuk, can you please ask Campbell if politicians are mandated to take COVID-19 injections?
Gee, that's a really good question. And I must confess I'm not across the various jurisdictions and what's going on, but I can tell you about what happened in Victoria. So down there, my colleagues, Tim Quilty and David Limbrick from the Liberal Democrats were excluded from Parliament, the state Parliament of Victoria, because they refused to reveal their vaccine status. So
I don't know how the governor didn't step in that situation. I'm thinking constitutional emergency. That is exactly what the governor is for.
I'm not sure exactly.
Politicians, representatives excluded from the House of the People.
Yeah, well, I think the way that one happened is the Parliament itself did it. So Parliament is a self-governing body. They set the rules of procedure, when they sit, when they rise, when they adjourn, all those sort of things. They're masters of their own destiny. What I understand happened was that they actually literally had a vote, and the Liberal Party voted with the Labor Party to push this through. Well, not push it through, it was just a slam dunk, and said, if you don't sort of show to the staff of the Clerk of the Parliament that you've been vaccinated, you'll be excluded. And so Limbrick and Quilty were able to attend Parliament by video link, but the trouble was they couldn't vote. Under the rules through the pandemic, they could attend by video, but they actually had to be present to vote. So anyway, that's an example of where, the wrong things happen. But I can understand, by the way, for Joe Citizen in the community, the idea that you're being coerced to get vaccinated so you can go to your local pub on a Saturday afternoon. I guess you'd probably want to see the politicians treated the same way if they were going to turn up to Parliament or do their job. So it's got, look, we were told by the Prime Minister a long time ago that we're all in this together. Again, more roll gold baloney, but we can dream, can't we?
Yeah. I'm just having a look at. So Anne's asked this a second time. I'll just see what your thoughts are on this. Can Annastacia Palaszczuk have them bash our door down and jab us? Can they actually roll out the military or the police and start rounding them up to force the jab? Or can we have them for trespassing and assault? A libertarian's nightmare, Campbell.
No, not as I would understand it. But they don't need to do that, do they? They just sort of make your life unbearable or joyless. If you can't go to the restaurant, if you can't go to the art gallery or the museum or the movie theatre, or the only place you can go is the darn supermarket, you're under a lot of pressure, aren't you? If you can't go to, it might be, I haven't looked at the detail of this, but if you can't go to, say, your kids' end of year sort of the speech night at the high school or the primary school. Now that's just awful, but that's pressure, isn't it? That's coercion.
At least half the people I know who've had the jab had it unwillingly and reluctantly. With, as I said at the beginning, family treating each other despicably. Grandparents not allowed to see grandchildren. Not allowed across borders and various other things. This is not, and I think Albanese or somebody was crowing about 80% vaccination rate and well done. It's like, how can anybody say well done when a significant portion of everybody that has had it reluctantly and wouldn't have had it if they felt they'd had a choice. But to try and earn their freedoms back. I mean, what?
Yeah, well, a point on this freedom thing, David. I mean, the freedoms are ours. They were snatched away from us by government at federal and state level. They were snatched away. They were taken away. They're not governments to sort of hand out like lollies to good children. We want them back. We want them back
exactly
now.
The relationship,
and we have to make that very, very clear. So, that's where I'm coming from. Look, I just ask people, if they're watching this and they're still on conviction, really please think long and hard about this. Don't get sucked in by sort of this emotional blackmail that's been occurring as well. That's part of the coercion. It's like, again, just the facts of the matter are, again, that, and this is what, as I would believe them, that vaccination poses some risks, but it offers the best protection at the moment. And maybe there are some treatments out there, certainly around the corner, there are some really effective treatments, but vaccination at the moment is probably the best option. But what do you care? Like, if you're a person who's vaccinated but worried about people coming to the kids' school who are unvaccinated, why do you care?
Yep.
Why do you care? You've been vaccinated. It just doesn't make sense. It blows me away. So think long and hard. There's no need to treat someone badly because they decided not to have it. We can all have a view about why they didn't, and some people might be judgy. Well, that's one thing. But to treat people badly, to exclude them, to marginalise them, to put pressure on them, to insult them, that's not on. That's un-Australian. That is un-Australian.
It really is, and at least un-Australian. It's un-Christian. It's just
un-Christian.
Incredibly buying into this toxic division, which is just another one of the divisions caused by one of the harms caused by government policy. Look, let's move to something perhaps a little lighter, a gratuitous soapbox moment for you. I think the best outcome in the impending federal election, the imminent federal election, is that perhaps the Liberal government gets returned and they have a nearly unmanageable, intractable, mired Senate crossbench with a whole lot of people like yourself, people right of centre, pro-freedom and liberty, anti-authoritarians, who simply won't cooperate.
Pro-family.
Say again?
Pro-family.
Pro-family. Thank you. I mean, that kind of crossbench, I think, is the best hope for Australian democracy and Australian citizens and residents. I think one of the best terms of parliament that we could see before the next federal election would be for a significantly reduced amount of legislation, because it's just so hard to get anything but the best legislation approved. If we're looking at having a strong crossbench, right of centre, there are a number of options to go for. There's One Nation, there's the Australia One Party, there's the Liberal Democrats, there's Clive Palmer's party, the name United Australia Party. I guess we can talk about Queensland specifically, but even across the various states voting for senators in the federal parliament at the imminent federal election, feel free to self-promote and just we'll trust you to be as honest and objective as you can while talking about why you think the Liberal Democrats should be in that mix and how you would probably rate the others.
Sure. Well, look, I have a great deal of sympathy for what you're saying about the nature of the parliament. So, yeah, I would prefer to see a Morrison government or a Liberal coalition government with the Nats in the lower house, but a Senate that had people on the crossbench who were prepared to take a stand on these fiscal issues from a more centre-right perspective. So I think that would make a better government. I think it would really hold perhaps the Liberal Party back from being as left-wing as they have been in the last few years. In terms of the choices then for people, you've outlined the parties that are out there. Why the Liberal Democrats? Well, they've been around for 20 years. They are a party of significant principle. It is that libertarian thing. If you believe in the things I was talking about earlier on, which is that you get to live your life as you see fit, that hard work, self-reliance can be rewarded, that personal responsibility is applauded and recognised, that we recognise that small business is the engine room of employment and really a great economy. Those, if you believe in those sorts of things, if that's really what turns you on, then Liberal Democrats really are a party for you, and we'd appreciate your support. Particularly, though, I've also added for Queenslanders, we're very firm that this headlong rush towards so-called net zero is incredibly worrying for Queensland's future prosperity. I once got in trouble a bit on ABC radio because I dared to say that we're in the coal business in Queensland. Well, we are. The fuel in police cars, the great health system that we have, the fact that an ambulance comes when you call it, that would be massively curtailed if we couldn't fund it through coal royalties and through payroll tax from people who work in the coal sector. So the idea that a federal Liberal government would start to quite recklessly go down a path of adopting a slogan is dangerous. And again, those MPs I called out earlier on should hang their heads in shame. So the Liberal Democrats are going to stand up for the resources sector, particularly the coal and gas sectors in Queensland. We know how important it is. We know how important it is for overseas countries, developing countries that need those resources so they can actually achieve a standard of living like us. Yes, we believe in sustainability. Right outside the window behind me now, there are solar panels on the roof. I'm a big one for sustainability. I have had solar panels since 2007, but we've got to be more sustainable ultimately, but we can't do it in a way that trashes the economy, destroys livelihoods and communities, and that's the problem with what both the Labor Party and the coalition are now doing. So the Liberal Democrats will be standing up for Queensland, particularly on that issue.
Pro-nuclear?
Pro-nuclear. We've got an energy policy. If you go to the Lib Dems website, you can see our full energy policy. Basically, we're saying, look, stop interfering in the marketplace, government. Let the various forms of energy, wind, solar, hydro, coal, gas, and nuclear be there. And the private sector, if they want to implement some sort of power generation source from one of those energy sources, they're free to do that. I mean, often people will say, and I enjoy it when particularly left-wingers say it, they go, but nuclear power is uneconomic. that's their stunt these days. I mean, I don't think they get as far as they used to with saying how dangerous it is, because it's not. But they say it's uneconomic. Well, I've got a very simple answer. In Australia, there's a ban in legislation on nuclear power. We're just saying, take away the ban.
Fantastic.
Let the private sector have a go. And small modular reactors are probably the way to go in the future. Very safe.
Yes, agreed.
Can be deployed where you need the power, reducing energy losses in the transmission grid, and providing that important backup power to the renewables that we're going to have. And you know, again, I love renewables. I've got them here. I'm pretty much energy self-sufficient at my place these days.
And what do you think about reducing Australians to 14 grams of meat a day?
You've got to be joking. If people go to my social media, you can see a little cheeky bit of video I did prior to the Prime Minister going to Glasgow. And, you know, like, look, this is the problem. Like, my answer to those people is bugger off.
Yeah,
you know? I hope you don't mind me saying it on your show, David.
No, that's perfectly articulate.
Bugger off. Like, you know, like again, this is the libertarian thing. We're pushing back against the people who say we can't get Panadine over the counter in the chemist, or the supermarket. We're pushing back against the people who are telling us that we've got to curtail, you know, our consumption of electricity. We're pushing back on people who are saying we've got to go and buy an electric car. We're pushing back on people who are telling us what we can eat and what we can't eat.
Yep. Now, on libertarian, where we will come to blows, perhaps, is the issue of abortion, which Tanya Plibersek firmly settled in the federal sphere at the last election. So I understand you broadly feel people should make their own decisions. Would you support a policy position or legislative move to stop compelling me to fund other people's abortions at the violation of my conscience?
Well, probably just to go back a step first, before I answer the specifics you've asked, specific question you've asked. I've been talking about the libertarian philosophy. I think a really important point is in the case of abortion, there's actually two human beings involved, and one of them is the adult, and the woman's the adult and can speak and make the case. The unborn child doesn't have a representative. And so what's disturbed me is, while I support early term abortion, the idea of late term abortion, and indeed the legislation that was passed in Queensland in the last few years, is anathema to me, and it's anathema because those infants being aborted are only a few weeks younger than premature children that we're then desperately trying to save. How crazy is the world? On one hand, we're aborting children, babies, and over here we're only a few weeks later we're desperately trying to save them, and we can save them. So late-term abortion, as provided for now in Queensland, I think is just unacceptable to me anyway. And I'd
what do you think about some of the Texas bans on heartbeat detection? If you can detect a heartbeat, you're not allowed.
Well, you can detect a heartbeat really early in the piece, but I guess this becomes a really valued judgment and has to be finessed.
Or is this not something that science can speak very clearly and informatively on?
So anyway, look, I guess in summary, late-term abortion is something I find repellent, but early, a very early abortion, well, I can understand there would be circumstances, and in that case, I support a woman in those instances making her own decision. Oh, by the way, how often have we heard over the years in the abortion debate about my body, my right to choose?
Yep.
Particularly from the left, but now
of course
it's your body, but we're going to put a needle in it and give you a vaccine. I'll move on. So going back to your question, look, I think I support the public health system still paying for the procedure, I've got to say. And there are a lot of other examples
I'm disappointed. I expected a libertarian.
I guess that the trouble with the health system is that there's all sorts of other procedures the system pays for that you could probably question as well if you want to have a real debate about. I don't know if they're still doing it, but I have it on good authority. Only in the last few years, the Defence Force were paying through their medical support to men and women of the ADF. They're paying for cosmetic surgery.
Yep.
And I sort of, really? Like, is that really what
if that's not what you
well, perhaps even that, yeah. So, it's a difficult issue and a minefield.
Yep, awesome. Well, I won't push you too much on that. That wasn't the purpose of the interview.
No, it's fine.
Thanks for indulging the question. But
any question?
Internet for some reason. I'm back now. We just lost it all for a second. I do want to implore that we not be compelled in a libertarian rationale, that we not be compelled to fund something that violates our conscience. And I'll just you can take that as a comment.
No worries.
Campbell, thanks for speaking out against the tyranny of authoritarianism, the overreach of state governments, the apartheid and segregation of citizens, violation of human rights to privacy and medical autonomy. It's much appreciated. And if there's any way we can help your campaign, feel free to give us a yell, because we'd love to see a strong libertarian, right of centre, conservative crossbench to hold the current federal government and the next federal government, whatever colour it may be. We need a strong Senate crossbench to make sure legislation goes slow and they're held to account and reviewed properly.
We don't need heaps more laws in this country, David. We've got plenty of them. I used to say that, by the way, when I was Lord Mayor of Brisbane and indeed Premier of the state. But thank you for having me today. And I just say to people, if they have found it interesting what I've had to say and they want to see more about my views on issues, please follow me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. And we're always happy to take comments and messages from people, and always happy if you think I've got it wrong to hear that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well said. And we'll just play the outro and I'll end the broadcast and then I'll say goodbye to you privately. But thanks everyone for watching Pellowe Talk this afternoon. And we'll try and package this up and put it on the website so you can share it. Liberal Democrats are a viable option, in my opinion, for the Senate in the next federal election. I look forward to talking more about that coming up. If you'd like to see any of the other parties, minor parties on this show, then get in touch with them, let them know that there's an open invitation, and we'd love to give them a soapbox as well to show their wares. But that's it for this time. Head to goodsource.news, become a supporter, subscribe to the email newsletter, and thanks to the supporters for keeping this happening. Good night, everyone.
If not now, then when will we see an end to all this pain? Oh, it's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.